To all of you, we're glad you're present for our Bible class this morning. Those of you who are joining us by live stream, we welcome you. This is the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and it looks like a lot of our people were so thankful they left town. We're down this morning. I don't know why. I don't know of the sick, but let's remember our folks. I know we do have some traveling. Let's remember them. But we're going to have a good day today. I am excited about our day. When I called Jason Jackson and said, "Will you come for this day?" and he said yes, that made this day for me. I am so glad you get to meet Jason. I have tried to have all the editors of papers and books that we support to come speak so you could get to know them. Jason is the editor of the Christian Courier, and I have recommended that publication and especially their website to people through the years. And Jason has a good deal to do with that, he and his brother Jared. And their daddy I love very dearly. He was a great help to me and good friend. And I'm so thrilled that Jason can be with you. Now, Jason is a good friend of my son. Don't hold that against him, because my son's better than I am. So y'all know Daniel. But he and Jason have a lot of interests in common, and they enjoy each other. Jason normally on Sunday is with the Walnut Grove congregation in Benton, Kentucky. He drives up and preaches for them on Sundays. And then on Wednesdays, he's usually with the North Jackson congregation, does some teaching there. That tells you a little bit about Jason. If I've left out whatever you wrote down for me to say, you can add it in. I've asked him just take some few minutes at the beginning of Bible class, give us an update on the Christian Courier, and then he will teach whatever lesson he's chosen. Jason, come speak to us.
Thank you, Brother Rogers. Appreciate the invitation, and it's a joy to be with you on this day, this cold, blustery Lord's Day, but it's the Lord's Day, and that makes it a great day, doesn't it? Someone asked if my wife was with me today, and unfortunately Jill is not with me, and of course I miss her company, but she's got a really good excuse for not being here, and that's because we just had a granddaughter born and welcome to our family. And so Jill has been with our daughter Natalie and her husband and our little grandson, and she's been looking after them and helping them at this time. And so she's been doing that, and I guess that's a good enough reason not to be with me today. But she would like to be here and like to meet all of you, no doubt. I appreciate the opportunity to thank you for your support of the Christian Courier and to just give you a brief update about the work that we're in fellowship together and enjoy together in the cause of Christ. The Christian Courier is the name, first of all, of the publication that my dad founded in 1965. And it has run continuously on a monthly basis for over 60 years. And so the Christian Courier, as that paper is referred to by that name, is a paper that goes out monthly and has over 5,000 monthly distributions. And half of that is to congregations, and then about half of that goes to individuals. So think about a group of people, more than 2,500, and however many of those congregational issues get picked up. Think about a service of 2,500, 3,500 people. That's a lot of people. And yet that is delivered not in an auditorium, but through the mail. And we are able to have a significant influence in the brotherhood through these Bible studies. But something developed that we would never anticipate, and that was the creation of the internet and the development of it. In 1998, we began to publish Bible studies online at christiancourier.com. And a lot of people are unaware, but the content in the paper and on the website are not just mere images. They're not duplicates. All of the content on the website was created uniquely for that. There's very little overlap, even to this day. However, I want to tell you that, as you all know, from the beginning of the internet to today, there have been a lot of changes. And the internet grew to the point where, as those of us who use it know, that it is largely driven by our interest. That we might utilize a search engine and we might ask a question and we want an answer or we want information. And so the ChristianCourier.com website had to evolve according to that technology. But here's something that happened that we could never have dreamed of. That today, 70% of all the traffic to ChristianCourier.com, this Bible study website, 70% of all the traffic is search engine driven. What does that mean? That means when someone, 3 out of 4 roughly, people who come to ChristianCourier.com, they've come there because they have asked a question of Google, and we have been found or ranked high in that search. And so that means now, very different from 1998, most of our traffic are not members of the church, but people who are seeking answers and are finding ChristianCourier.com. Now, that doesn't happen by accident. You know, if you're searching for something and if you don't find it right away, you're on to something else. And so the website has to be engineered to be found or to rank high in a search. And so if you were to search, for example, what is the true meaning of grace, we would be on the first page of the search results. And on I could go, illustrating how titles, subheadings, and various kinds of encoding make it possible for our articles to be ranked high in appropriate searches. What does that mean? Let me tell you about Paul and Monica. Paul and Monica lived in Winslow, Arizona, and they grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses. When they married, they kind of went their own way, just living a pretty secular type of lifestyle. When they started their family, they thought, we need to get back to church. And all they knew was the Jehovah's Witness group. When they went back, they didn't feel they were well received. They felt kind of lost and isolated. And in the comfort of their own home, trying to get some kind of spiritual direction, they searched the internet. Who are the 144,000? Which, if you know anything about Jehovah's Witness doctrine, they're big on literalizing that symbolic number from Revelation chapter 7. You know what they found? They found an article called, Who Are the 144,000 on ChristianCourier.com. And from that initial contact, they found the local church, engaged in Bible studies, and were baptized and added to the Lord's church. It's much like what happened in Beaverton, Oregon with a man named Stephen James. Stephen James didn't even know if he could trust the Bible. He was a single father of a teenage girl having heart problems, and he began to ask some probing questions about spiritual matters. And so he went, as a lot of people do, to the internet. Can I trust the Bible? What about the Bible? Where did the Bible come from? He started asking those kinds of very fundamental questions. And he found ChristianCourier.com. Now, one feature we have on the website is if you land on an article, there are going to be suggested articles next to it, related articles. And that's by design, to try to keep people engaged, keep them there. You see, they've arrived there according to their interest, And if they see other things, you know how it is when you start going down a rabbit hole, and if you can keep them there. Well, Stephen James saw related articles. He stayed there. In fact, he stayed there a year, reading and studying and developing. And after about a year, he emailed and said, "Can you help me find a church that teaches what I'm reading on this website?" And what's he reading? He's just reading the Bible studies that resonated with him and rang true. And we put him in contact with the congregation there. They set up Bible studies and baptized him and his daughter. And those are just a few examples of the unique position we're in to have people knocking on our door. And that's a unique aspect of this work. And I thank you for your fellowship with us. There are always needs that outpace our resources, and your support is so deeply appreciated. Now, you and I, we want to do the very best to encourage our friends and family members, people that we meet, to trust the Bible, to go to the Bible. When we have a question, when we have a spiritual question, let's go to the Bible, and let's let the Bible be the final answer and authority for all that we believe and all that we practice. But it's not uncommon today for someone to respond to us when we say something like, "But that's what the Bible says." It's not uncommon today for someone to respond to that by saying, "So what?" In years gone by, we were more comfortable with just saying, "Now that's what the Bible says," as if it settled it for everyone, but it doesn't. And more people are saying, "So what?" to "That's what the Bible says." So why trust the Bible? We would say the simple answer to that question is because the Bible's from God. Now, here's a very simple, what we might call an argument or a common sense way to package the idea that the Bible's from God. You see, either the Bible's from God or from created beings. Either the Creator or created beings, one or the other. And if we can establish that the Bible is not from created beings, that it's impossible for man to have produced the Bible, then we're left with, well, the Bible must be from God. Either God or man. We're going to say it can't be man, therefore the Bible is from God. Let's think about how the characteristics and attributes of the Bible, when thoughtfully considered, reveal that this book is beyond the possibility of human production. This is a divine book. This book must be from God. The first thing we'll consider is this truth. We ought to trust the Bible because the Bible's here. Well, what does that mean? Of course the Bible's here. What does that have to do with anything? A lot of things are here. Think about this principle. Every effect must have an adequate cause. The law of cause and effect. If I were to ask, well, who built this church building? And someone said, nobody. Who made the world? Nobody. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Now, the Bible is here, and there needs to be some explanation as to why it's here. And the law of cause and effect requires that whatever explanation we offer, it has to be an adequate explanation. Here's why that's important. We've all probably seen pictures of the great pyramids in Egypt. You've seen pictures of the great pyramids. Maybe you even know someone that's traveled to Egypt. My sister and her husband a number of years ago made a trip to the Holy Lands and included, as they're so-called, Palestine, and then went to Egypt, saw the pyramids. So I know someone who's actually seen them, and we've all seen pictures of the great pyramids of Egypt. And there's all kinds of discussions, and you'll see documentaries and different programs talking about how did they build those pyramids without modern equipment, and to be so precise and perfect in their structure, to move those massive, massive stones. How did they do that? And there are all kinds of theories about it. What if I were to suggest that I believe I have discovered the way those pyramids came about? And I think what happened was that there was one of those sandstorms out there in the desert, and it blew through, and after it left, lo and behold, there were the pyramids. Now, would you believe that? You don't even have to necessarily know all of what happened in the construction to say, now, we need to dismiss that idea because that's crazy. In other words, that's not an adequate explanation. And I submit to you, and I think you also know yourself, that the Bible is also constructed with amazing engineering. And we can't just say, oh, it just happened. A sandstorm just blew through and there was the Bible. The Bible is too amazing to be explained in any fashion. Now, as we reflect upon that, we could talk about its incredible engineering or the amazing way it's constructed, and talk about things like its unity. Now, what does that even mean, and why is that a part of its incredible construction? Well, when we understand how long the Bible was in construction, that is over 15 to 1600 years, and that it all fits together perfectly, even though these are the facts about its construction, and it has this unity of theme, just like somebody sat down and wrote a whole story, yet it had all these contributing writers, and it all just came together. That doesn't happen by accident, without a mind behind the whole thing, a governing hand. Now that's hard to just share with someone. That's hard to really communicate to someone who is unfamiliar or won't read the Bible. I understand that. It doesn't make it any less amazing. The Bible's unity of theme, of purpose, unity of doctrine and consistency, it all fits together perfectly. There are other aspects like its accuracy, its scientific foreknowledge, and many other details that we could explore. But here is another aspect of it that I want to really focus on. So first we said trust the Bible because it's here, and there needs to be an adequate explanation for its characteristics. The second thing is this: we should trust the Bible because it is still here. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we're not talking about the pyramids. We're not talking about massive physical stones that have withstand the weather. We're talking about a book. And when we think about the production of ancient books, we're talking about fragile materials. We're talking about things that don't weather well. When we're talking about the Bible and the fact that it is still here, we're talking about a book that was produced from 3,500 years ago to its completion about 2,000 years ago. And that book had to be transmitted manually. There were no copy machines. There were no digital copies, cloud storage. But that's why we call the ancient writings of the Bible manuscripts, because they're manually created by hand. We are talking about expensive processes in the ancient world. We're talking about time-intensive work. And if we're all that curious about it, just go home this afternoon and sit down and copy the book of Isaiah and see how long that takes. It'd take a long time. And if you weren't very careful, you might even miss a line here or miss a word there. So to be precise, you'd have to even take more time and more care to hand copy that. So when we consider the materials and the time and all of that, what are the facts about the Bible being still here? You know, there are all kinds of books of history and antiquity that are out of existence. We only know of them because some other historian or author referred to such and such a book. And so most of the documents or writings of antiquity have gone by the wayside. The Bible's still here. Now, let's uncover some of the facts regarding this and appreciate this truth about the Bible. I'm reminded of what we read in Isaiah 40 and verse 8. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of God abides forever. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Not just that they're true and his decrees will stand, but what value would that be if we didn't know what his words were? The Word of God, think about it, is still here, though produced upon ancient materials in difficult climates for it to survive, and yet it has in a powerful way. Let me read to you an interesting description of the Bible that I came across in a book called The Divine Inspiration of the Bible. The author said, now suppose there was a man who had lived on this earth for 1,800 years, that this man had oftentimes been thrown into the sea and yet could not be drowned, that he had frequently been cast before wild beasts who were unable to devour him, that he had many times been made to drink deadly poisons which never did him any harm, that he had often been bound in chains and locked in prison dungeons, yet he had always been able to throw off the chains and escape from his captivity, that he had been repeatedly hanged till his enemies thought him dead, yet when his body was cut down, he sprang to his feet and walked away as though nothing had happened. That hundreds of times he had been burned at the stake till there seemed to be nothing left of him. But as soon as the fires were out, he leaped from the ashes as well as vigorous as ever. Such a man would be superhuman, a miracle of miracles. Yet this is how we should regard the Bible. It has been burned, drowned, chained, put in prison, torn to pieces, yet never destroyed. So think about this. The ancient times in which the Bible was produced were times in which books were produced by hand, very expensive, time-consuming, on materials that did not weather well. At the same time, this book is hated. It is burned. And it is destroyed. Now, given the facts of ancient books' production and lack of longevity, and the facts that the Bible was so despised by many, it's remarkable that the Bible is the most popular book of the ancient world, period. Now, here are the supporting truths that demonstrate that. No book in the world is as well represented as the Bible regarding ancient books. That is, whether we're talking about the father of history, the Greek Herodotus, whether we're talking about Suetonius, whether we're talking about other Jewish historians like Josephus, whatever books of the ancient world we're talking about, we don't have nearly the representation that the Bible has. What do we mean by representation? Well, who owned it? How widely is it distributed? How many copies? And so when we look at the Bible, we see where it's found in the ancient world, how many different times it's found, how many closets it's in, how many libraries it's in. Where's the Bible compared to all other works of antiquity? Nothing comes close. And the Bible was the hated book. Now here are the facts. Nothing comes close. Not anywhere close to the number of copies that have been found of the New Testament in the world. To date, there have been discovered nearly 6,000 New Testament manuscripts. Well, without some point of reference, that's maybe not impressive or just an abstract fact. When we think about the other works of antiquity, whether we're talking about Josephus or the Roman historian Tacitus, or whoever it might be, the ancient books that are at least well known to some degree in the world, those books are literally represented by dozens of copies. Maybe at best hundreds of copies. The New Testament has been found in more than 5,800 handwritten copies. Now, what does that even mean? That means there was demand. Somebody wanted a copy. And so somebody took the time and went to the expense to get the parchment, or maybe in a certain period of time, get the papyri, get the ancient paper, or get the animal skin, get the ink, hire somebody or do it yourself, and to go to all the expense to get one copy. Again, how long would that take? And yet, the New Testament is represented in nearly 6,000, and let me emphasize, 6,000 Greek manuscripts over the course of many centuries. All the way back to the 2nd century, all through the Middle Ages. But here is an interesting fact about The Bible's still here, even under these difficult conditions. It is the best attested book of the ancient world. Here's an interesting fact. Not everybody in the ancient world spoke Greek. But there were a lot of people that wanted to read the Bible. So in addition to the 5,800 plus Greek manuscripts that have been discovered of the New Testament, there have been over 10,000 Latin handwritten Bibles discovered. In addition to that, over 9,300 copies of manuscripts in other languages like Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, and Armenian. You know what that means? Here's the simple truth. There is no book in all of the world that had as much demand, as much interest as the Bible. And it is known, that is, it is attested, it has been found all over the world in all kinds of languages, in spite of the persecution it endured through the ages. The Bible is still here. What explains that interest in its message? Now, here is another, I think, helpful fact. Not only is the Bible the most popular book of the ancient world, nothing comes close. What about today? I mean, we've moved beyond the Bible, right? I mean, as a society, as a world, we're not so superstitious, backwater. You know, we're educated in the world today. What kind of demand is there for the Bible today? What kind of interest is there for the Bible today? Remember, the Bible in centuries gone by was literally stolen from Christians and destroyed. So how many copies would there be if that hadn't have even happened? We just have what survived. But not only were physical copies attacked, but its message has been attacked. And so who cares how many copies there are floating around in the world if people don't believe it and trust it because of its message has been invalidated? Well, so what? There are thousands of copies. The French philosopher by the name of Voltaire once said that within 100 years the Bible won't even exist anymore. Well, where's Voltaire? The Bible's still here. Let me share with you these interesting details. One organization, one among many like this, that distributes Bibles is known as the United Bible Society. In the year 2001, the United Bible Society distributed 23,200,000 Bibles in that year alone. Now, the world's already saturated with Bibles. But there are people being born every day. There are young adults who are asking questions every day, who will be exposed to the Bible for the first time in their life. There was such an interest in 2001 that they distributed, on average, 44 Bibles every single minute for the entire year. Well, let's fast forward to the decade of 2015 through 2024. The The United Bible Society in that time distributed 2.6 billion Bibles. Some of these are New Testaments or other parts of Scripture. But that tells us something about interest in the world today. The top 10 countries in which these copies were distributed were Brazil, India, China, Nigeria, the Philippines, the United States, Indonesia, Kenya, Colombia, and Mexico. I don't know much about the various cultures of the world, but I think China's a little different than Mexico. That's just a guess. But yeah, there's something about the Bible that appeals to everybody. It's almost like the Bible was engineered for the human heart and soul. And not only is the best attested book of the ancient world, but is still the most popular book in the world today, and that is an indisputable fact. I witnessed this on a very small scale back in 1996 when I had the opportunity to travel to Ethiopia. And in one of our stops out in the bush, as they called it, we went to a place called Sadamo, and we were traveling around to the various destinations on our trip in a small type of SUV. It was called a Nissan Patrol. And everything over there is virtually diesel. And so we, put it into this little village, pulled under a big tree, opened the back of that Nissan Patrol, and it was like we were being mobbed. There was a mass of people gathering and people clamoring and reaching for what? What were we passing out? Bibles. In the Amharic language, the official language of Ethiopia, and people were just begging to have their own, for the first time in their life, have their own Bible that they could read. What about the Bible? Appeals to people, human beings, of all times and in all places. What about that? What's the explanation? It's not a sandstorm blow through and it was just there. It is not that, well, this is just a good book. There's something else going on to explain that the Bible is here, it's here like it is, and it is still here and still in great demand. Let's think about one truth that demonstrates the Bible could not have been produced by human beings, therefore must be a divine production that fits all of the other facts that we have described so far. It's great demand. And that is, we should trust the Bible because it is just simply beyond the possibility of human production, as demonstrated by a unique or magnificent engineering quality known as prophecy. Now, prophecy is simply telling the future. And because the Bible is spread out over centuries in terms of when it first began to be composed to when finally it is completed, it is spread out over such vast period of time that you have then this makeup that something could be said in the Bible about what's going to happen so many centuries later, and then you can look back and see God revealed in the Bible this was going to happen long before it ever happened. Let me give you 3 characteristics of Bible prophecy. These are important because You know, if I were to say to you, today that something is going to happen sometime to somebody, and then later this week I said, see, it came true. You say, that doesn't make any sense. That's so vague. Of course, you could claim that came true. It's so vague. The Bible's not like that. Here are the three matters about Bible prophecy that we must keep in mind. First of all, exact fulfillment. There's no need to talk about a divine prediction if it doesn't come true. And so when we think about Bible prophecy, we're talking about things that exactly were fulfilled to the letter. But we're talking about matters that contain specific details. Not vague generalities, but details that were exactly fulfilled. And the third characteristic is adequate or proper timing. That there's so much time between the specific prediction and the exact fulfillment that this wasn't a guess, this wasn't just a lucky guess, but this is indeed a divine prediction, something that human beings cannot do. And this doesn't happen once or twice or a dozen times. This happens over and over again regarding prophecies about nations and prophecies about people. Let's just zero in for a few minutes on prophecies about Jesus. You see, when we begin to read our Bible, and the Bible just resonates with people of all times and places, doesn't it? The Bible talks about very personal matters that get to the heart and soul of people, about our lives, about questions like, where do we come from and why are we here and what's going to happen in the future? Why do I feel a certain way when I do certain things, no matter how much I try to talk myself out of it? What about these moral feelings and the matter of obligation? The Bible speaks to all of these things, and in the very beginning we learned that God created us with moral feeling and obligation, and yet a problem entered the world when sin did. And in Genesis 3:15, we have the first glimmer of hope. That hope is going to come through the seed or the descendant of woman. I mean, they're a human being. God is going to use a human being, a descendant of woman, in his plan. But when we keep reading in our Bible and this story begins to unfold, the great plan of redemption, we come to Genesis 22 and verse 18 and learn that this plan is going to take place because of the seed of Abraham, the descendant of Abraham. Not only the descendant of Abraham, Genesis 22:18, but this person's going to come from the tribe of Judah, Genesis 49 and verse 10. And he will be a prophet like Moses, Deuteronomy 18 and verse 15. In fact, not just generally in the tribe of Judah, but from the family of King David, 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 to 16. And he will be born to a virgin, Isaiah 7:14. He will be born, how specific was that? And he will also be born, how specific is this? In the city of Bethlehem, Micah 5 and verse 2. And in some sense, he will be called out of Egypt, Hosea 11 and verse 1. Where did Joseph and Mary flee when they're fleeing from Herod? They went to Egypt. And then were called back home. It will be during the days of the Roman Empire, the 4 kingdoms of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel 2:44. And in fact, he will be called the Son of God, Psalm 2 and verse 7. He'll be introduced by a voice crying in the wilderness. Did that happen? With the coming of John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness, as predicted in Isaiah 40 and verse 3. And when Jesus comes, he will preach peace and good tidings, Isaiah 61, 1 and 2, and he'll be gentle and kind, Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 3. He'll come riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, Zechariah 9:9, which in fact happened. But so many of the things that happened to him were things that other people did who were his enemies, who would in no way be trying to fulfill prophecy. He was rejected, Psalm 118, verses 22 and 23. He was despised, Isaiah 53 and verse 3. He was betrayed by Judas, Psalm 41 and verse 9. Betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, Zechariah 11, 12 and 13. In fact, he was tortured, Psalm 22, 12 to 21. He was given gall and vinegar to drink, Psalm 69 and verse 21. They gambled for his garments, casting lots, Psalm 22 and verse 18. His disciples were scattered, as prophesied in Zechariah 13 and verse 7. And this man, who had nowhere to lay his head, owned nothing probably than the clothes on his back, was buried with the rich. Isaiah 53 and verse 9. But as Peter said, David predicted he would rise from the dead. Psalm 16, verses 8 through 11, and he would ascend to the right hand of God. Psalm 110 and verse 1. Why trust the Bible? Because the Bible is beyond the possibility of mere human beings producing it. It is a book that has incredible engineering that explains its great demand in antiquity and today, not the least of which is predictive prophecy. In 1910, there was this interesting case in criminal justice where a man was convicted of murder because of fingerprint evidence. Now, that doesn't sound remarkable to us today, but it was then. Lee Strobel, in his book, The Case for Christ, and I know there's a lot of concerns and problems with that book, but I find it interesting that in chapter 10, he tells this story of the very first time that someone was convicted based upon fingerprint evidence. Thomas Jennings had broken into a home in Chicago in the early morning hours of September 19th, 1910. He was confronted by the homeowner, Mr. Clarence Hiller, and Thomas Jennings shot and killed Mr. Hiller. He was later arrested, and as the detectives looked for more and more evidence, they found that he had entered through the kitchen window, which Mr. Hiller had just the day before painted. So the paint was still kind of soft. And there were 4 fingerprints of someone's left hand that matched perfectly to Thomas Jennings. You see, the fingerprints are so unique to every individual that the ridges and the form of it can identify who made the fingerprint. And I submit to you that when we take a careful look at the Bible, God's fingerprints are all over it. He's been here. This is his book. And that's the only reasonable explanation. that the Bible is here, it is still here, and evidences divine inspiration. Thank you so much for your kind attention today. I look forward to being with you all here on the Lord's Day.